everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Welcome to Novels Wonderland Reincarnated in Jujutsu Kaisen with Naruto System, Chapter 166 to 176, JKNS, Chapter 166. 2,161 words. Though they don't have names, I feel like I can go to One Piece and become a three-sword style swordsman. Click. The sound of washing in the bathroom dissipated, and when Osumi, who was wearing pajamas and had a towel on her head, walked out from it, and shouted in her mouth, "Brother, it's your turn to take a bath." Yuki got up, and looked at the slug sage, whose figure had expanded by 2 circles, and she had merged with the slug sage who had stayed at the high school at this moment, and then picked up his change of clothes and walked into the bathroom. Swish. Yuki had already thrown the clothes on his body into the washing machine, and was bathing under the cool water. The cool water fell on his body like raindrops, and it seemed that even his soul had been purified, and he was enjoying it very much at this moment. Speaking of which, his black pupils slowly opened, and looked at the falling water droplets. Kyusuke Butsuya had wanted to talk to him before, and he was the second-year homeroom teacher. He would go and meet him tomorrow, and he should know that he had returned to school at this moment. Did he want him to join the higher-ups, and prevent his homeroom teacher from being implicated or something? Whatever the case, he would take a look tomorrow. Wave-breaking sword. Yuki's brain paused, and a name that suited that special-grade curse tool suddenly rang out. The cursed energy blade that was slashed out could easily break through the attacking waves. Wave-breaking sword, that's the name. The next day, Yuki, who had finished making breakfast, left with the wave-breaking sword that was in a black backpack. It was 5:50 in the morning at this moment, and when Osumi was still lying in bed and sleeping soundly. Yuki waved at the awakened slug sage and Shura, and then slowly closed the door. Click. Looking at the sun that hadn't risen yet, and the coolness that only belonged to the morning, Yuki stretched his back, and said with emotion, "Today is really a good day." Teacher Kyusuke had called him at 22:15 last night, and had agreed on a time to meet him. That person was very strange, and he was clearly a teacher, but he rarely stayed at Jujutsu High, and he had also been deliberately looking at his watch when they had met before, and it seemed that someone couldn't leave him. "Where are you going so early in the morning?" Zen and Maki, who was on the training ground, had gotten up early as usual, and asked after looking at Yuki, who was walking past. "I'm going to meet Teacher Kyusuke, and I'll be back soon." Yuki smiled slightly, and squinted his eyes, and looked with difficulty at Zen and Maki, who was dozens of meters away, and if she didn't move, he would have thought that it was a building. To be honest, he probably wouldn't be able to see her even if she moved. After all, she was too blurry, and his brain would automatically remove her, and it could be considered the brain protecting him, and it would be very difficult to distinguish things that he couldn't see clearly. Zen and Maki looked at Yuki's difficult appearance, and also knew the general situation of his eyes at this moment. After all, they had been together for so long, and she could always feel something. Her right hand clenched unconsciously, and this guy was always trying to be brave, and he was probably pretending that nothing was wrong, and that's why he had chosen not to wear glasses. "Bye-bye, I'll be back as soon as possible." Seeing that Zen and Maki wasn't speaking, Yuki waved and left, and he was holding the backpack strap with his right hand, and humming a ditty in his mouth. See you later." Looking at Yuki, who was acting like nothing was wrong, Zen and Maki also raised her right hand, and prepared to wait for Gojo-sensei to come back and discuss this matter with him, and if Yuki continued like this, he would go blind. That kind of blindness probably couldn't even be cured with reverse curse technique. After all, he could use it himself. How troublesome. Yuki, who had walked out of the high school, slowly closed his eyes, and the sage art pattern gradually appeared on his face, and he took out his phone and looked at the address, and turned around a few times and looked at the direction, and then left. Because it was in Tokyo, and it was located in a prosperous area, he hadn't let the exploding bird carry him, and the backpack that had originally contained the exploding bird had also been thrown into the corner of his house, and his black backpack only contained 3. It wasn't like he was going to fight, so there was no need to be fully armed. Does it suit your taste? Ah. Warm breakfast shop, commonly known as a breakfast shop, but almost half of the people in Japan would choose not to eat breakfast, and this kind of shop was quite rare in prosperous Tokyo, because it would probably lose money if you did it. Kyusuke Butsuya was holding a spoon at this moment, and was feeding his sister, who was sitting in a wheelchair in front of him. Ah. The relatively thin woman, who was sitting in the wheelchair, opened her mouth, and ate the porridge in the spoon in front of her mouth. Because it was only 6 o'clock at this moment, the shop seemed relatively deserted, and the boss was enthusiastically preparing for the 6:30 rush hour, and his eyes were occasionally looking at the man and woman on the side, and a gratified expression was revealed on the corner of his mouth. He said, "You're working hard, bringing your sister over so early every day, and haven't found a girlfriend yet? You're almost 30. Ah. Not yet. Kyusuke Butsuya scratched his head, and only smiled slightly when faced with the boss's concern, and said, "It's because my sister used to like coming here to eat the most." "Is that so? Then I'll continue to do this." The boss said, and then stopped speaking, and was just happy. After all, it meant that his cooking skills were being recognized if he could always have repeat customers. 10 minutes later, Yuki walked into the shop while holding his phone, and his black pupils looked around at this small shop, and the sage art pattern on his face had dissipated before he had entered the shop, and he quickly saw the teacher, who was sitting in the depths, and looked up and squinted his eyes and looked at the shop's signature dish, and said, "Boss, I'll have an egg over rice, and a bowl of miso soup." "Okay." The boss looked at Yuki, and said while making it, "You look unfamiliar, young man, and if you're not short of money, do you want to choose the squid over rice? It has our shop's special secret seasoning, and it's very delicious. Oh. Then I'll have the squid over rice." Yuki didn't refuse. After all, he could steal the recipe, and he liked secret recipes the most, and it was the pride of a chef. He took off his backpack and walked towards Kyusuke Butsuya, who was in the depths. He put the backpack under the table, and looked at teacher Kyusuke, who was wiping the mouth of a thin woman, and said, "I'm here, sensei." Sit down, I've also just finished eating." Kyusuke Butsuya looked at the cursed tool under the table, and said, "You're doing well, and carrying cursed tools when you go out can effectively protect yourself, and even if you're not on a mission, you have to pay attention to the revenge of your enemies. After all, it's legal." Yuki nodded, and looked at the woman, who looked somewhat similar to his teacher, and her eyes were haggard and lifeless, and it seemed that her mental state wasn't very good, and said, "Sensei, may I ask, who is this?" "Ah, my sister, but it's okay, and as you can see, she's sick." "Your miso soup and squid over rice." Because they had already been prepared, the dishes were served very quickly, and the boss put the plates on the table while whistling, and glanced at the three people and then directly left. Yuki looked at the plate, and there was an extra bowl, and there were 2 fried eggs in it, and he was just preparing to say something. The leading boss said, "This is a special, and it's time to replenish energy in the morning, and you look so thin, young man, so eat quickly." "Thank you." What a straightforward boss. Yuki picked up the disposable chopsticks, and asked, "What did you want to see me about, sensei?" "I've already agreed if you wanted to say that you wanted me to be directly managed by the Jujutsu headquarters. I did think that way a few days ago. After all, you'll implicate the entire second year now, and I'm very sorry, but..." Kyusuke Butsuya said and then swallowed, and said, "Can you make my sister return to normal?" "Huh?" Yuki's pupils contracted slightly, and the egg on his chopsticks fell into the bowl, and it wasn't that he didn't understand what he had said, but that he understood it too well. Teacher Kyusuke's sister looked like she had collapsed at this moment because she had suffered a serious blow to her mind. In medical terms, he could only enlighten her and have her take medicine, and let her walk out of this foggy area on her own. But his Sharingan could seal away that part of her infinitely magnified memories, and forcibly make her walk out of this foggy area. Only he knew about these things, so how did he know? This was what made Yuki surprised at this moment. So how had his hidden secret been exposed? Genjutsu was one of the few trump cards that he displayed, and he generally only used it in places where there was no one. "I don't know, after all, I can't handle mental problems, and I'm just an ordinary Jujutsu sorcerer who can cook." Yuki picked up the fried egg that had fallen into the bowl, and ate it with a calm expression. Although this was his teacher, they hadn't gotten close enough to be able to confide in each other, and he only felt sorry for the situation of his sister at this moment. "You can do it, and Principal Yaga told me a few days ago that you might be able to handle it." Kyusuke Butsuya suddenly grabbed Yuki's left hand, and it also made Yuki himself feel a little disgusted. He stubbornly said, "Sorry, I don't have such a heaven-defying ability, and please find someone else, sensei." Yuki didn't believe Kyusuke's words at this moment, and continued to eat the rice in his bowl. Jujutsu High was managed by the higher-ups after all, and he didn't want to reveal too much to anyone other than Gojo Satoru and Yaga Masamichi. After all, the more you revealed, the faster you would die. Especially the matter of his eyes going blind, and if Geto Suguru and the others knew about it, who knew what they would do to him? He was in the dark at this moment, and the enemy was also in the dark, and they were competing for information, and creating the illusion that he would destroy them if they dared to come out, and there were also those trash higher-ups. Although he didn't know if they were real trash or fake trash, Yuki himself was unconsciously being substituted into it after seeing Gojo-sensei's unconcerned appearance. Whenever someone mentioned the higher-ups, he would instinctively have the idea that the higher-ups are all trash. And along with what had happened to Itadori this year. "Sorry, I was too agitated. After all, my sister has been like this for many years, and I always think about what my sister should do alone if I die." Kyusuke Butsuya took back his right hand, and had a somewhat ashamed expression. "You're saying it like I'm not human." Yuki's black pupils looked at teacher Kyusuke, and he always felt that there was something in his words, but he didn't speak again, and continued to eat the rice in his bowl, as if nothing had happened just now. Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 167, JKNS, Chapter 167. 2,170 words. He wouldn't admit that he could treat her, and he could only wait for him to take the initiative to propose a vow to bind himself. After all, if he took the initiative to propose it, wouldn't it tacitly admit that he possessed the rhetoric of being able to control other people's minds? This kind of approach was very dangerous, so it was simply pushing himself into the abyss. 1 bowl of miso soup, and egg over rice. Okay. People began to come into the small shop one after another, and were enjoying this rare moment of leisure. Yuki, who had finished eating the squid, poured the miso soup into the rice, and turned it into miso soup rice. Time passed by minute, and Kizukabe's eyes were wandering between his sister and Yuki. He could vaguely feel that Yuki certainly had a way to make his sister walk out of the pain of losing a loved one. His mind was recalling the conversation that he had had with Yaga Masamichi 2 days ago. August 2nd. Inside the principal's office. Are you ready? To let your sister see Takaru. Yaga Masamichi, who was sitting on the sofa, crossed his arms, and looked at Kyusuke Butsuya with a serious expression, and continued, although he succeeded, he's not your nephew, and he's just a cursed corpse that possesses information related to your nephew. Kyusuke Butsuya, who had been thinking for a long time, nodded, and said, how can she face her future life if she's always immersed in the pain of losing a loved one? But, my sister won't be able to live if she loses the support of the past. Alright, but she can only take a look. Yaga Masamichi slowly got up. I know, and the existence of the completely independent cursed corpse can't be made public, and I can't let him live with my sister. Kyusuke Butsuya nodded at this, and his eyes were serious. After all, it would be very terrifying if this thing was exposed, and although other manipulation techniques could also make artificial cursed corpses act independently, they could only consume the cursed energy that had been given by the technique as power. And the completely independent cursed corpse was like a person, and not only did it possess thoughts, but it could also autonomously recover cursed energy, and this also meant the birth of an army of jujutsu sorcerers. Actually, you can try looking for Yuki, and there's no need to make your sister feel more grief. Yaga Masamichi sighed, and after thinking about it, he felt that this autonomous cursed corpse would place too much of a blow on the living. Manufacturing an army of jujutsu sorcerers? He hadn't thought about it at all, and he had just given those dead souls a second life, and let them live happily, and that was all. Yuki? Kyusuke, who was holding a lollipop in his mouth, asked with a puzzled expression, and he didn't know why the principal had mentioned his name. He knew that he could use reverse curse technique, and he also knew that he was strong, but these things couldn't heal the damage that had been done to the heart. Some of the enemies that Yuki killed were handed over to Shoko for examination, and some of their consciousness had been tampered with. Consciousness? Kyusuke was somewhat puzzled, and what did this consciousness being tampered with have to do with Yuki? What to say, you just need to know that he should possess the ability to control other people's consciousness, and that's why I recommend that you go look for him, and also keep this matter a secret. After all, he's very dangerous at this moment. Gulp. Kyusuke Butsuya inexplicably felt a sense of oppression at this moment, and also knew the importance of this matter, and got up and said, I will definitely not say anything about what happened today, I swear, and thank you. If Yaga Masamichi's independent cursed corpse was just to find psychological comfort for his sister, then Yuki at this moment was the person who could make his sister return to normal, and although he didn't know when he would return to school, he only needed to wait at this moment. After all, he had already waited for so long. A few more days wouldn't make a difference. Was he uneasy about me because I hadn't made a vow? Kyusuke Butsuya, who had finished thinking, looked around, and found that there were more people at this moment, and then suppressed the excitement in his heart at this moment, and prepared to talk again after finding a place where there was no one. It was a good thing that he was maintaining this kind of vigilance at this moment. After all, he had already been targeted by the higher-ups, and it was his fault that he was too stupid to show his awareness, and Yaga had clearly reminded him so much. I've finished eating, and I'll be leaving if there's nothing else, Teacher Kyusuke. Yuki put his hands together, and put the chopsticks into the plate, and he hadn't even left a grain of rice in the bowl, and the food that this shop made was indeed not bad, and he could tell that they were putting their heart into making the dishes, and more importantly, he had roughly figured out this secret seasoning, and he would try it for dinner. Let's go out and talk in a place where there's no one. Kyuzukabe said quickly, and he was afraid that Yuki would leave, and he wasn't a teacher at this moment, but an ordinary person who was asking for help. Okay. The two walked out of the breakfast shop, and Yuki looked at Kyuzukabe's sister, who was sitting in a wheelchair. Kyuzukabe Utsuya, thank you. No, there's no need to thank me, sensei, and there's nothing I can do, and I can understand your mood of wanting me to leave, and me staying here will only implicate the second years, and someone has to be the bad guy, and I'm not a child. Yuki shook his head, and didn't feel that there was anything wrong with his approach, and it was just the most correct choice for humans. His black eyes looked at the road ahead again, and he also had his own plans. That thing that was following him couldn't be sensed at this moment, and it was probably because there were too many people, and their lines of sight were intersecting. If the teacher proposed a vow, he would help him, and if he didn't propose it, then it would mean that their fate was like this. He didn't know how long they had been walking, and it might have been half an hour, and Yuki's attention had been on his conversation with teacher Kyuzukabe, and he seemed to have seen something clearly during this period, and he had been talking about his past things, and although his appearance looked like he had the same personality as Nanami Kento. It was indeed like this the last few times that they had met, and he was very serious. But the difference was that he had given all of his gentleness to his sister, and he had been talking about his sister's past things in his mouth just now, and it could be seen how much this man had given. Kyuzukabe Utsuya stopped, and said, I will make a vow here, and I will forget everything that I have seen and heard with you today, and I owe you a favor, and I will agree to anything that you ask of me in the future. Can I ask you to save my sister? Yuki. Okay. Perhaps it was fate, and he had already given this much, so he could only agree, and he was a grade 1 sorcerer who was working for him, and it was really the first time that he had seen this. The ranking of sorcerers was different in each country, and that thing Diabolo could only get grade 1 in Japan. He raised his right hand that was holding a fist, and his index finger and middle finger stood up, and said, Emerge from the darkness, blacker than darkness. Purify that which is impure. He didn't feel that sense of peeping at this moment, and opening a curtain was just instinctive, and as the small curtain with a radius of 2 meters was set up, Yuki's black eyes turned scarlet, and the three tomo were slowly rotating, and then condensed into a kaleidoscope, and looked at her soul at this moment, and reminded, I can only infinitely shrink that part of the enlarged memories, and I can't make them disappear directly. After all, something will happen if you tamper with memories at will, and you should throw away the things that should be thrown away when you go back, and I don't need to say anything else, right? It's fine if she forgets, and it's better than letting her be immersed in pain all the time. Kyuzukabe Utsuya nodded, and forcibly endured the tears that were flowing from his eyes, and he didn't have a better way to handle it than this. Then. I'll begin. Clang. Yo-hoo, I'm back. Looking at the fighting on the training ground, Yuki, who was carrying a backpack, shouted loudly. Yuki-senpai, you got up so early? Itadori Yuji, who was sparring with Zen and Maki, looked up and saw Yuki walking on the road. Don't get distracted when you're fighting. Zen and Maki, who was holding a long staff, knocked Itadori Yuji, who had been distracted, away. He. Looking at Itadori, who had rolled 3 or 4 times on the ground before stopping, Yuki inadvertently laughed, and this guy was still like this. Come down and have a fight? Zenin Maki rotated the staff in her hand a few times, and put it behind her, and raised her right hand and waved at Yuki. I can. Yuki stopped, and walked towards the training ground. Kyuzukabe Utsuya's matter had also been handled, but it seemed that he didn't have anything special to order him to do, and it was still very safe inside the barrier of Jujutsu High, and it was the 5th today, and he would have to leave tomorrow night. He took off the backpack on his shoulder, and it was only around 7 o'clock at this moment, and the sun had only risen not long ago, and everyone on the field except for Maki, Itadori, and Yuki were still sleeping. Pat. The black shoulder bag was casually thrown on the ground, and Yuki walked into the training ground, and put on a stance and waved at Zen and Maki, who wasn't far away. They had been together for so long, and they could communicate without words, and it was the transmission between their eyes. Trust, and tacit understanding. Ouch ouch ouch. Itadori Yuji, who was feeling pain, slowly got up, and looked at the senpai and senpai who were about to start fighting, and retreated a few steps to a place that he thought wouldn't be affected, and just watched. He felt that he could learn some good things. He always had this feeling, and his taijutsu instructors these past month were Gojo-sensei and Senpai Maki, and Yuki-senpai had also taught him, but he had just been getting beaten the whole time back then. In a daze, he could hear a voice echoing in his ears. What a weakling, and you were defeated by that brat with taijutsu, and you're clearly completely crushing him in terms of physical strength, but you've become a punching bag. He didn't need to guess to know that this was the complaint from his friendly neighbor Ryaman Sukuna in his body. It also made him realize that even if he possessed a relatively strong body, he was still trash if he didn't know how to use it. He really wanted to carry out a mission with Yuki-senpai again, and he always felt that he had learned something last time, but he hadn't learned anything. After all, that cursed spirit with a scar on his face had forcibly stripped his consciousness from his body. Rustle. As the sound of sand grains rubbing together was transmitted, the two people on the field then moved. Pat. Yuki's whole body was covered in cursed energy, and his right hand peeled away the attacking long staff, and his left hand stretched out like a swift snake, and tightly bit Zenin Maki's collar, and he was just preparing to use force to throw her out. Ha! Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 168, JKNS, Chapter 168. 1,672 words. Zenin Maki squatted down and stabilized her center of gravity, and her left hand clamped down and prepared to break Yuki's outstretched right hand. After all, this was a fight, and it was inevitable to get injured, and their fights had always been like this. It was really convenient to have reverse curse technique. Tisk. Seeing this, Yuki could only retreat helplessly, and it was more of a game of wits than a spar at this moment. It was just a matter of seeing who would reveal a flaw first. The two alternated their eyes, and were both looking for a chance to kill with one strike, and after tangling like this for 5 minutes, Yuki, who was holding a broken staff, was more skilled, and won the victory. Beautiful, Maki, Yuki. Indeed. Panda and Inumaki Toge were sitting on the side, and they had come when the two were fighting. Before long, Fushiguro Megumi and the others also walked over, and started their morning training. Yuki, aren't you going to train the first years? Panda looked at Yuki, who was sitting on the side and watching the show. No, it's fine like this. Yuki sat on the steps, and looked at the first-year Kohai who were running and warming up, and said with a smile, Panda, you say, if I earn enough money, should we go and retire early together? Graduate? Panda looked at Yuki, and also knew that this together included Toge, Maki, and Yuta, and said, we can consider it, but it seems that we're not short of money, right? Maki is going to be the head of the Zenin family, and we can go retire when she becomes it. That's true. Yuki, have you gotten tired of exorcising cursed spirits? I guess so, and I always feel that my current self is getting further and further away from the idea of yearning for peace, so I always stop and think, but the final conclusion is, only by being strong enough can you enjoy peace. Yuki supported his head with both hands and stared at the people on the field, and his black pupils trembled slightly, and he seemed to be fantasizing about a life in the future where he didn't have to train, didn't have to exorcise cursed spirits, and had earned enough money. Before that, he was going to kill all of those annoying guys. As his consciousness went astray, his trembling pupils gradually became firm, and this was his hypnosis for himself, and it was also the vow that he had set for himself. There were 2 kinds of vows, one was the restriction with others or others with himself, and the other was the restriction with himself, and the former was easy to understand, and the latter could also be used for amplification. For example, restricting his cursed energy to allow himself to obtain some other kind of amplification, and it had a feeling of equivalent exchange. A peaceful life, if it's really possible, I do know a place, and we'll go there together then. Panda muttered to himself, and recalled the place where he had been born, and it was a vast forest, and it was very beautiful, and he and his older brother and older sister had always lived there, and it would feel good if they went back. Is that so? Then we'll move in there when that day comes, and say goodbye to this terrible world. As soon as Yuki finished speaking, he felt that someone seemed to be eavesdropping behind him, and turned around to look. Wah! Yuki, who had been startled, shouted loudly, and looked at Yaga Mazamichi, who had arrived behind him at some point, and said in surprise, Principal, you should say something when you arrive, and you scared me to death. He had been chatting too intently just now, and he hadn't noticed when Yaga Mazamichi had come over. Who are you saying goodbye to? Yaga Mazamichi put his right hand on Yuki's head, and then the veins began to bulge, and he also sighed helplessly in his heart. He's already tired of the world. This is really difficult to handle. Ouch ouch ouch, I was wrong, I didn't say goodbye. Yuki quickly begged for mercy. Don't be like this, Yaga. Yuki's reaction is very normal, and he's just talking about the future. Panda shrugged helplessly on the side. Then you're still guiding him to escape the world. Yaga Mazamichi punched his own son, and this guy was also not letting him rest easy. Woo! After a wail, Panda, who had a bump on his head, was lying on the ground, and the people on the training ground also looked towards Principal Yaga, and didn't know what he was going to do. Temporary mission. Yaga Mazamichi looked around and shouted, Yuki, Itadori Yuji, Fushiguro Megumi, come to the principal's office with me. Yuki complained in his heart, and what kind of trash luck was this, and he had finally come back, and he was going to carry out a mission again. Was this year a busy year? Or was it just him alone who was busy? Oh, coming. Itadori, who had heard that he was really going to carry out a mission with Yuki-senpai, became excited at this moment. Fushiguro Megumi, who had heard that they were going out to carry out a mission, also walked over, but what made him a little curious was, what kind of mission needed Yuki-san, who had just returned, to carry out? It could only be a special grade if he was being sent out, or was it purely to bring Itadori? Let's go. Yaga Masamichi dragged the Yuki, who had no love for life, towards the principal's office. Yuki is really working hard, and he's being taken away again. Inumaki Toge, who was on the track, complained. Zenin Maki looked at Yuki, who was leaving, and her right hand clenched unconsciously, and she also wanted to become stronger, and allow the busy Yuki to rest, but her current self seemed to have reached a bottleneck, and no matter how she trained, she was still like this, and it was like she was standing still. Run! Zenin Maki shouted instinctively. Click! Inside the principal's office, Ijichi Kiyotaka and Yoshino Junpei, who had already arrived, were standing straight in place. They were looking at Principal Yaga and the others, who were walking in from the door. Oh. I didn't expect that we could carry out a mission together so quickly, Junpei. Itadori Yuji looked at Yoshino Junpei, who was standing inside the principal's office, and said excitedly. Good morning, Itadori, Megumi, Yuki-san. Yoshino Junpei nodded, and greeted them in turn. Good morning. Not good at all. Fushiguro Megumi and Yuki responded. Although I know how you're feeling at this moment, you can only blame that guy Gojo, and he's gone abroad, and he can't come back now, and this mission has naturally fallen on your head. Yaga Masamichi shifted the blame onto Gojo Satoru, and began to talk about the main matter. The enemy is that special grade cursed spirit who can control other people's souls, and although I don't know if it's a trap, I can only ask you to do it. After all, you're the only one who has fought him many times, and if you can, exorcise him as much as possible. Mahito, huh? Yuki nodded, and as for why he didn't say his name, he just felt that there was no need, and so what if he said it? It was just an alias, and it could be changed at will. It couldn't be that he could curse him through his name, right? If it could be like this, then Gojo-sensei would probably have been cursed long ago. He didn't know if they would be able to fight, and that guy Mahito ran very fast when he saw him, and he estimated that he had just woken up in this situation, and was hunting human souls for his own use. It was very troublesome. Understood, I'll handle this matter. Then please come with me, and I'll talk about the mission location and the information that Window has at the moment. It wasn't Ijichi Kiyotaka, but Yoshino Junpei. Ijichi, who was on the side, was just watching silently, and Junpei had been following him for more than a month, and he had to start trying to be independent. He was like an old father at this moment, and was watching silently. How amazing, Junpei! Itadori Yuji said in amazement after seeing that Yoshino Junpei was already so amazing, and he had already started to take over Ijichi's missions, but he still couldn't act alone. It's nothing. Yoshino Junpei, who was a little embarrassed, scratched his head, and although he felt that he couldn't do it perfectly at this moment, he had to work hard to continue doing it since he was trying to do it, and Itadori and Sensei were watching him. He's indeed much better than that idiot Itadori. Fushiguro Megumi also praised. What did you say? Itadori, who had heard Megumi slander him, immediately became unhappy, and grabbed his collar and shouted. Alright, everyone is friends, so don't be like this. Right, Yuki-san. Yoshino Junpei, who was trying to mediate, looked at Yuki. Clang. Yuki pushed open the door to the principal's office, and said, I might not interfere in this mission, and you'll die if you guys are still arguing like this at that time. Oh. Yuki-san, how scary. Yoshino Junpei complained in his heart, and the two also closed their mouths, and quickly followed him out. Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 169, JKNS, Chapter 169. 1,730 words. I'll be leaving first then. Ijichi Kiyotaka glanced at Yaga Masamichi, and then closed the door and left. See you later. Looking at the closed wooden door, Yaga Mazamichi sighed, and said with some helplessness, Yuki is really reliable, and he doesn't have that kind of worldly ideal, and wants to retire early, huh? From August 1st until now, the population that has been abducted by that special grade cursed spirit has reached 154, and it's still increasing, and the bizarre disappearance of this kind of population is very normal in Japan, but they're all in one area at this moment, and it has already caused local panic. Yoshino Junpei said while holding a report, after the window S examination. Sorry, I have a terrible sense of direction, so just tell me which place it is, and we can talk about the rest when we get there. Yuki interrupted, and he had to go back to the room to get his equipment at this moment, and bring all of the exploding clay birds, and save himself from being tricked by those guys, and then signing a contract for no reason. It's in Okinawa. Yoshino Junpei said quickly, and then took a deep breath, and he was still somewhat uneasy at this moment, and it was his first time doing this. Okinawa, huh, that's difficult to handle. It was a summer tourist destination in Japan, and the flow of people was terribly large, and no wonder that guy Mahito was so arrogant, and it turned out that he had found a way out. Young master, I've been waiting for a long time, are you planning to go out? Diabolo, who had been arranged to live on the side, was standing outside his house and waiting at this moment. I'm back to get something, and watch over my sister here. Okay, and although it's a pity that I can't follow, I will perfectly complete this task. Yuki nodded, and opened the door, and looked at Uenosumi, who was eating breakfast, and said, I'm back, is breakfast delicious? Delicious. Uenosumi jumped down from the small stool after seeing that it was her older brother who had returned. It's good if it's delicious. Yuki stroked Uenosumi, who had run over, and walked to the side of the bed and picked up the backpack that contained the exploding clay, and the two cursed tools that had been placed in the corner. Is brother going out? Uenosumi blinked her eyes. Yeah, and I'm sorry that I can't come back at night, and Sumi, you can go live with Sister Maki. Yuki said with a smile, but his expression was full of helplessness, and he also wanted to accompany her for a bit longer in the end, after all, he was going to be leaving for a long time. I understand, and I'll be waiting at home, and brother has to come back safely. Uenosumi nodded, and seemed to be trying to prove that she was very sensible, and sat back at the table and ate her breakfast. See you later. Yuki looked deeply at her, and then directly left. Take care, Yuki. See you later, master. The slug sage and Shura saw him off. For them, Yuki was just going out normally. I'm leaving. Yuki waved his hand, and he had a very wonderful feeling at this moment, home. The four people outside the door looked at the slightly crowded small house, and the single houses that Jujutsu High distributed were roughly one room and one bathroom, and at most there would be a kitchen added. Originally, this house was about enough for Yuki, Shura, and the slug sage to live in, and Uenosumi had now moved in, and although it looked a little crowded, it felt very warm. Although he didn't want to admit it, most of the people at Jujutsu High had lost their parents. They had become jujutsu sorcerers because of their hatred for curses. Looking at the envious expressions of the four people, Diabolo snorted coldly, and how could they compare to His Majesty, and such a kind His Majesty would definitely be embraced by all things, and he was happy. What are you looking at, let's go. Yuki distributed the cursed tools in his hand to Itadori Yuji and Fushiguro Megumi, and made a hand seal with his right hand, and controlled the exploding clay bird that was specially responsible for flight and transportation. Thump. Deep in the forest, a gust of wind blew past, and the trees were blown to the point of crack sounding, and the birds that lived there began to leave in groups. The golden eagle spread its huge wings, and after fanning them a few times, it suddenly flew up. That's... Itadori Yuji squinted his eyes, and looked at the giant bird that was flying out of the forest thousands of meters away, and he could even feel the wind and waves attacking. That's... Yoshino Junpei recalled the giant bird that he had seen on the training ground yesterday in his surprised pupils, and he had originally thought that it was some kind of sculpture, but he didn't expect that this thing could fly? He turned his head and looked at Yuki, who was making a hand seal, and a gentle breeze blew past, and the purple horns that were being covered by the broken hair on his forehead floated up at this moment. What to say, he felt that it was very beautiful. This was a very wonderful feeling. Thump. 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 The golden eagle arrived, and a strong wind began to ravage the surrounding trees, and the sound of air being torn apart was transmitted, and the huge body slowly landed, and that huge head just happened to be spliced with the third-floor railing, and formed a staircase. Let's go up. Yuki dragged Ajichi Kiyotaka and Yoshino Junpei, who didn't have any fighting power, and jumped up. Fushiguro Megumi and Itadori Yuji, who were holding cursed tools, also crossed the railing and jumped up. Ah, awesome, in my lifetime, I'm flying. Yoshino Junpei, who was standing on the golden eagle's back, knelt down subconsciously, and his hands wanted to grab something that was raised, but there was nothing like that, and he was really afraid that he would fall down. After a moment, he chose to lie down, and although he didn't want to do this, he couldn't help it, and he was afraid that he would fall down. Hold on tight, we're going to Okinawa. Yuki took out his phone and opened the map, and looked at everyone's expressions, and nodded with satisfaction, and it should be like this. Humanity's fear and yearning for the sky. It's about time, and these souls will probably be surrounded if they stay any longer, right? Drip. The turbid black water dripped into the drain, and inside the sewer that was emitting a stench, for humanoid cursed spirits were standing in place, and their red pupils stared around, and tears could be seen flowing from the corners of their eyes. Creak. The sound of the iron sheet bending was transmitted, and a pink hammock was swinging at this moment, and Mahito, who was lying in the hammock, looked indifferently at the book in his hand, and said, "We'll leave after taking a bit more, and it would be best if we could run into Yuki. After all, mice that are scurrying around everywhere will also resist the cats that are hunting them. And, who's the cat isn't certain." Pat. Crisp footsteps echoed in the underground, and attracted the attention of a group of cursed spirits, and tears mixed with tears flowed from the corners of their mouths, and they roared, "Kill him, I." How painful. Mahito just glanced at the reactions of the cursed spirits that he had created, and then stopped caring, and continued to look at the book in his hand. It's time to leave, and that guy Yuki left Jujutsu High with Itadori not long ago, and he's probably coming to find you. Geto Suguru, who was wearing a black short-sleeved shirt, white shorts, and a baseball cap, looked at Mahito, who was reading a book. He really came, huh? Mahito closed the book in his hand, and his different colored pupils stared at Geto Suguru, and said with a smile, "I can't leave yet, after all, I still have to experiment, and can I trouble you to watch in the dark, Geto?" It's not impossible. Thump. Too fast, Yuki-san. Slower. The golden eagle was flying through the clouds at this moment, and Yoshino Junpei, who was lying down, shouted loudly. Ichichi Kiyotaka was kneeling in place at this moment, and had a shoulder bag on his back, and his hands were gripping the smooth body of the golden eagle's back, and the veins on the back of his hand could be seen bulging. "You won't fall down." Yuki was sitting leisurely, and was feeling the wind that was flowing in the air, and the moist water vapor in the clouds. "It's so high." Itadori Yuji was lying on the golden eagle's body, and looked at the azure sky outside the clouds, and asked curiously, "Yuki-senpai, is this a shikigami or something?" "It's ninjutsu-o." Yuki grinned. "Ninjutsu? Ah." Fushiguro Megumi, who had already understood, recalled the scene of him coming to Jujutsu High last year and sparring with Yuki, and he had indeed said that it was ninjutsu, but it seemed that it had been treated as a joke back then. As a result, his technique was still a mystery until now. But was this what ninjas were like? He could spew fire, he could release lightning, he was very skilled with swords, he could fight at long range and close range, he could summon shikigami, and he could also fly, and he was completely without flaws. So it was true, and I thought that you were joking back then, Yuki-san. Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 170, JKNS, Chapter 170. 2,112 words. In response to Fushiguro Megumi's complaint, Yuki just replied, "Yes." Thump. As the golden eagle flapped its wings, everyone could see the azure coast, and Itadori, who was sitting, shouted, "The sea. I can already see the sea." "Our goal isn't the sea, idiot." Fushiguro Megumi slowly got up, and squinted his eyes and looked at the sea in the distance, and said, "More than 150 people have disappeared in 5 days, and we can't let him continue. Watch me personally exorcise that scar-faced bastard." Itadori Yuji raised his thumb and pointed at himself and said, "I'm his natural enemy, oh, Fushiguro. You're not allowed to call Ryaman Sukuna out." Fushiguro Megumi looked at Itadori with disbelief, and that guy had already run away from Yuki-senpai a few times, so how could this guy be his natural enemy? He can tamper with other people's souls, right? But it seems that he can't touch mine. Itadori Yuji was elaborating on the experience that he had gained from being unconscious last time, and he was suddenly grabbed by the ankle, and he was scared half to death. But it seemed that he couldn't tamper with his soul because he had Ryaman Sukuna in his body, and although it was shameful to be taking advantage of him, he could definitely rush to the front at this moment. It might be a bit of a joke to personally exorcise him, but it would be enough to delay him and create an opportunity for Yuki-senpai, and exorcise this special grade cursed spirit. It could also be considered an explanation to those who had died. To be a meat shield, huh? That is indeed feasible. Oh. Yuki, who could no longer easily open Susanoo, was also somewhat thinking about Mahito's hands, but it was just thinking about it, and he would still die if he was pulled into his domain. This rat who was scurrying around everywhere, he better not let me catch you. Clang! The huge golden eagle crash-landed in a forest, and the originally dense forest was blown crooked by the strong wind. After everyone landed safely, Yuki stroked the golden eagle's wings with his right hand, and had it reshape and compress. This physique was too large, and he couldn't take it away, and he couldn't just leave it in place. He only stopped after it had turned into a square clay Yuki, and began to make hand seals with both hands. Earth release, Earth Dragon hiding technique. His hands touched the ground, and the originally viscous soil was like quicksand, and devoured the clay, until it disappeared, and the last doghead earth flow wall sealed the opening, and it could be considered to have been completed. It's hidden well, let's go, and we can reshape it when we go back. Yuki clapped his hands, and signaled that they could set off. How amazing. Itadori Yuji, who couldn't use any techniques, complained, "It's like magic, but it's real magic, Yuki-senpai, your technique couldn't be fantasy come true, right? It's not that amazing and it's just ordinary ninjutsu." Yuki said with a smile, and if his technique was really as ridiculous as fantasy come true, he would have ridden on Gojo Satoru's head long ago, and it was an invincible technique that could affect the rules of reality. Why would he still play with ninjutsu? It was too weak. We've finally landed. Yoshino Junpei patted his chest and sighed, and it was really too scary, and if he told his mother about this when he went back, she would probably smile and say with emotion, "How wonderful. Alright, we've arrived, so let's continue." Yuki took out his phone and looked at the crash landing address, and began to look for a way out. Okay. Yoshino Junpei picked up the report again and continued, after the Windows examination, the missing people. "Please, you have to find my son, and he clearly just went out with his friends, but he was the only one who didn't come back in the end, boo-hoo-hoo." A middle-aged woman with wrinkles on her face, and was crying her eyes out, and she looked to be in her 40s or 50s, and tears welled up in her originally red eyes again after mentioning her son, who had suddenly gone missing. We will definitely find him." Yuki said something insincerely with an indifferent expression, and the people behind him didn't say a word. According to the information, this was the last family where someone had gone missing bizarrely, and it had happened last night. According to the information that they had obtained, her son had gone to sing karaoke with his friends at night, and had suddenly disappeared in the end, and those friends had thought that he had gone back first on his own, and they hadn't cared. It wasn't until 3 o'clock in the morning that this mother, who had been anxiously waiting for her son to come home, had called those people, and had finally confirmed that her son was missing, and she had even looked for him all night for this. It could be understood if it was a teenager who was being playful and didn't want to go home. But her son was already 25, and he always came home on time on weekdays, and he had suddenly disappeared without a trace, and his phone couldn't be reached, and the police couldn't find him, and in the end, she could only report him missing. Yuki had also set the target point to that karaoke, and left after saying a few simple words of farewell to the woman. "Don't be sad, we will definitely find him, and I believe that your son doesn't want to see you like this either." Itadori Yuji, who was still kind, unconsciously clenched his fists, and he wanted to kill this cursed spirit that had made others so grief-stricken. Junpei, who was standing in the distance, looked at Itadori's back, and suddenly fell silent, and unconsciously clenched the report. The kinder a person was, the more they understood other people's grief, and he also secretly vowed in his heart to do this matter well. Don't let these angry emotions blind your eyes, and our mission isn't to be indignant for others, and the assistant supervisor is to provide useful information for the Jujutsu sorcerers, and reduce the deaths of the Jujutsu sorcerers. Ijichi Kiyotaka, who was used to this, reminded, and then picked up the tablet and looked at it, and it was the marked map, and the photos of those missing people. Each of them had roughly marked where they had disappeared, and this was the result of being busy from August 2nd until yesterday, and asking each of the more than 100 households one by one. Everyone set off, and it was 10:40 in the morning at this moment, and Yuki took out his phone and started to navigate the way. "Yuki-san, are we going to that karaoke?" Fushiguro Megumi, who was on the side, looked at the location in Yuki's phone. The last person who had gone missing last night was very far away from the others, and it shouldn't have been that special grade cursed spirit who had personally caught him, and there will definitely be some cursed energy remnants left on the field, and along with the fact that we had chased after that guy in the sewer last time, we should prioritize investigating the sewers near the karaoke. After all, a dog can't stop eating shit. Yuki raised his right thumb, and said with an expression that he had the victory in his hands, but if nothing was left behind, then there was nothing he could do, and they could only have someone guard a street, and his time was limited, and if he couldn't catch that guy, he could only let Gojo-sensei come over and take over. "Me and Itadori, are we going to fight him?" Fushiguro Megumi recalled what Yuki had said in the principal's office this morning. Of course, but you have to be careful, and you'll die if he touches you, and I'm telling you in advance, and you can hide behind me if you're scared. Yuki's tone was mixed with intimidation. In terms of strength, Mahito didn't have Jogo's wide-range destructive moves, and he didn't have his terrifying speed, and the only thing that was difficult to handle was that he was hard to kill, and extremely hard to kill, and the rest was fine, and as long as Fushiguro Megumi was careful, nothing major should happen. Should. He couldn't guarantee it either. You can hide behind me if you're scared, oh, Fushiguro. I'll restrain him to death. Itadori Yuji raised his thumb and pointed at himself, and seemed to be saying I'm very strong in general. Who would hide? Fushiguro Megumi turned his head and snorted coldly. Yuki was watching silently, and he wouldn't let them go up, and he was just joking, and he just wanted to see if that special grade cursed spirit had caused them any psychological trauma last time. The 4 first years had almost been wiped out by a special grade imaginary cursed spirit, and it was inevitable that there would be some trauma, such as the aura, and the special grade's majestic cursed energy. He asked, Fushiguro, what was your mood like when you first encountered a special grade cursed spirit? Fushiguro Megumi, who had been bickering with Itadori, fell silent, and his black pupils looked around, and the figure of that special great imaginary cursed spirit was engraved in his mind, and he couldn't forget it for a long time, and he also had the cowardice and powerlessness at that time, and said after a moment, I won't run away again. That's not running away, and that's the best strategy, right? Itadori Yuji put his arm around Fushiguro's shoulder, and said with a smiling face. Yeah, Karaoke? Looking at the colorful neon sign, Yuki looked down at the navigation on his phone, and then put it into his pocket, because no one had died in the shop, the police had just investigated the surveillance cameras, and hadn't closed the shop. But the results were unsatisfactory, and the surveillance cameras were broken. It seemed that the heavens were going against the shop owner, and the newly bought surveillance cameras hadn't been installed yet, and a bizarre disappearance case had appeared in the shop, and the surveillance cameras in the vicinity were all targeting his small shop, and this had made the originally simple matter much more complicated. He said, this is the place, and Itadori, Fushiguro, and Ijichi, the 3 of you go in and investigate, and Junpei and I will go and inspect the surrounding sewers. Okay. After distributing their respective tasks, Yuki walked towards the alley on the side. He had looked at the map one last time just now, and had confirmed that this alley wasn't a dead end, and it connected to another road called Oki Street. His black pupils scanned the ground and the surroundings, and there were no black cursed energy remnants left on the ground. Scary. A whisper was transmitted from the water-permeable manhole cover, and an eye poked out from the gap, and it was like a slug's tentacle, and it hastily left after seeing Yuki, who was walking over. Clang. The loose manhole cover made a sound, and it echoed in the underground. Yuki looked at the loose manhole cover under his feet, and didn't sense any cursed energy remnants on it, and then left. Although this manhole cover was very suspicious, he had to inspect it for a lap before drawing a conclusion, and he probably had some kind of serious illness if he jumped whenever he encountered a manhole cover. There was an eye poking out of that manhole cover that we just walked past. Oh, Yuki-san. Yoshino Junpei reminded after seeing Yuki step over the manhole cover, and he hadn't seen what he had said at all for Yuki, who was almost blind. Ah, damn it, his eyes were ruined. Yuki complained in his heart, and his vision was really too blurry, and everything 1 meter away was a mosaic. Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters, visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 171, JKNS, Chapter 171. 2084 words. It's just a fly's head, so there's no need to care too much. He said and then continued to move forward. Clang. The originally inconspicuous sound of the manhole cover echoed in the underground, and Flyhead was scurrying around in the intricate sewer, and the squeaking sound attracted the attention of many sleeping cursed spirits. One by one, scarlet pupils slowly opened, and stared at the scurrying Flyhead, and whispers were transmitted from their mouths, so hungry, want, eat something. After saying that, they picked up the limbs on the ground and gnawed on them, and made up for the emptiness in their stomachs. The place had just been inspected last month, and there were no cursed spirits, but it was full of cursed spirits at this moment, and this was all thanks to Mahito's arrival. Don't worry, there's a big meal tonight. Mahito took out the stored transfigured humans from his mouth, and said to Geto Suguru, who was behind him, Geto, you seem to have done a Hyaki Yagyo last year, right? Yeah, what's wrong? Geto Suguru looked at the transfigured cursed spirits who were eyeing them covetously, and looked at Mahito with some puzzlement, and didn't know what he was going to do. I also want to try to see what kind of experience Hyaki Yagyo is like. A sinister smile was revealed on the corner of Mahito's mouth, and he wanted to use Yuki to do an experiment for himself, and he had thought so ever since he had just woken up, and he had originally just come here to take some human souls and leave, but he didn't think so now that Yuki had come. He wanted to put it into practice. If he wanted to figure out the essence of his own soul, he had to carry out slaughter. It was like an instinct, and he had deliberately put it in Mahito's mind, and he wanted to put himself into practice, and it would be tonight. Yuki had brought him the feeling of the essence like tearing of souls, and Ryaman Sukuna had made him feel the difference at the soul level. They were all very good experiences, and he really wanted to have it again, and it was a collision between souls. Ah! How wonderful! Inadvertently, Mahito stroked his body and shouted, and a flush appeared on his face, and this was the essence of his desire. It looks like you'll have a lot of fun, Mahito. Geto Suguru looked at Mahito, who could no longer restrain his desire, and a smile was revealed on his mouth, and said, do it to your heart's content, and just treat it as a reward for you helping me last time, and I'll be watching. Of course, but, what if I accidentally kill Yuki? Mahito's different colored pupils stared at Geto Suguru, and seemed to want to see through him. That would really be difficult to handle. Geto Suguru didn't think that Mahito could kill Yuki, but Mahito seemed to be very troublesome at this moment, but it was a good thing for him that he could grow, and it had a feeling of raising poisonous insects. Is that so? Mahito looked at the artificial cursed spirits that he had arranged, and spat out the stored human souls from his mouth, and clapped his hands together. Pat. He then kneaded them together, and it was like sticky dough, and he fused the souls in his hands together, and formed a stronger artificial cursed spirit. The power of ordinary people was humble, and even if they were transfigured, they could only reach artificial cursed spirits that were slightly stronger than grade 3, and weaker than grade 2, he had also tested it at the movie theater before, and he had fused the souls of 3 humans into one cursed spirit, and it was probably because the repulsion between the souls was too great, and it had caused the thing that had been combined to not be that strong. But it was different now. Multiple souls. He kneaded together those souls that matched each other, and formed an artificial cursed spirit with multiple souls that were of the same mind, and had less repulsion. Several souls of different sexes. The souls that were being kneaded began to take shape, and it was like the rapid growth of a fetus, and in just an instant, an artificial cursed spirit that was emitting a terrifying aura was born. It was like a small titan, and the muscle lines on its body were distinct. The cursed spirit that had been born was just standing in place blankly, and it was like a work of art, and it was standing upright, and it was also like a mech that hadn't been activated yet, and once it was dispatched, it would have to fight the enemy to the death. But this was just one of Mahito's experimental data, and there were still many things that couldn't be displayed at this moment. 1405. I didn't inspect anything. Itadori Yuji tore open the packaging and said, and the people who were standing in front of the convenience store were eating the rice balls in their hands. I and Yuki-san also didn't find any cursed energy remnants, did Mr. Ajiwara Kazushi go out to the bathroom? Yoshino Junpei looked at the spicy cod roe, flavored rice ball in his hand, and he had patrolled the surroundings with Yuki, and had also looked at the surveillance cameras at the various intersections, but he hadn't seen anything. As Yuki had said before, all that was left now was to inspect the sewers. Let's disband after we finish eating in a while, and it's rare to come to Okinawa, so let's go and see the nearby scenery. Yuki finished eating the rice ball in his hand, and threw the packaging into the trash can, and he was going to inspect the sewers alone next, and although inspecting separately was more efficient, this mission wasn't a joke, and he would feel guilty if someone died. Itadori Yuji looked at Yuki with a puzzled expression, and didn't quite understand why they were going to play. I'm not going. Fushiguro Megumi looked at Yuki, who wanted to handle it alone, and he knew very well that Yuki-san would still handle it on his own even though he had said that he was handing it over to them. He couldn't do this, and they had clearly come to Jujutsu High around the same time, but he was still so weak. He said, Yuki-san, wait for me for a bit, and I'll also go and explore after I enter Sage Mode, and Itadori has Ryaman Sukuna in his body, and we can both go. Yeah, we're very strong. Itadori, who had understood, quickly clenched his sturdy right arm, and his muscles bulged. Why were these brats so disobedient? And although he was only a year older than them, he was the leader at this moment, and he was a grade 1 sorcerer. Seeing the serious expressions on their faces, Yuki knew that his obstruction was useless, and they would still follow behind him, and although he was somewhat helpless, he could only do this, and said, then the two of you go together, and if you encounter that special grade cursed spirit, then crush this. He said and then took out a sage art exploding clay bird from his backpack. He had a connection with this thing, and as long as a barrier like curtain didn't separate the signal, he could control it remotely, and he could also sense the approximate location of the two if it was crushed. Okay, Yuki-senpai. Itadori Yuji took the white sculpture in Yuki's hand, and it was heavy and quite weighty, and after taking a closer look, it was actually somewhat similar to the giant bird that they had ridden before, and this one seemed to have been made even more meticulously. "What kind of bird is this, Fushiguro?" Upholding the principle of asking if he didn't understand, Itadori asked with a puzzled expression. "Golden eagle, and it belongs to the birds of prey." Fushiguro Megumi glanced over, and then sat on the ground and began to enter sage mode. "Oh, it's quite good looking. Then I'll have to trouble you to wait outside, and I'll try to reduce the impact as much as possible if we really start fighting, and I'll have to trouble you to evacuate the crowd," Yuki said, and then picked up another rice ball, and prepared to eat his fill before setting off. Why did he feel that his words were a little strange, and it seemed that he wouldn't live for long? "Okay, leave this matter to us." Ichichi Kiyotaka nodded, and then picked up the rice ball on the stool on the side and left with Yoshino Junpei, and prepared to communicate with the local police department, and it would be convenient to evacuate the crowd later. "See you later, Yuki-san, Fushiguro, Itadori." Yoshino Junpei waved and left. "See you later." 1432. Clang. Yuki lifted the sewer near karaoke and just lowered his head and looked at the scene inside, and the smell that was similar to trees and rotting corpses was transmitted. It had the smell of a bottled world, and it was like filling a plastic bottle with soil, and then throwing the animals that you had caught into it, and occasionally putting in a predator to watch them kill each other, and in the end, both sides would die because there was no oxygen. Although it was very cruel, it was also one of the few toys that he had had for entertainment when he was a child. After all, they were all low-level creatures that didn't have any intelligence in his eyes back then. It was roughly this kind of smell after both sides had died and you had opened the bottle cap. Yuki frowned at this, and then jumped down. Swish! Black sewage instantly submerged his ankles, and the foul smell filled his entire lungs, and he could still hear the sound of squeak 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 of rats in his ears. Soft silt was settled in the putrid black water, and it was seeping into his shoes along with the water flow at this moment. The flowing water would occasionally drift past the corpses of insects, and along with this pitch-black sewer that could only accommodate one person, it made the atmosphere on the field become strange. Scary, scary. A low murmur echoed in the sewer, and Yuki also moved. This kind of sound was just the shouts of those low-level cursed spirits, and they seemed to have been disturbed, and they were scurrying around in this sewer at this moment. There were no cursed energy remnants on the field, and had that guy Mahito personally taken action? Or was it like what Junpei had said, he had come out to go to the bathroom, and then had accidentally encountered Mahito, who was on his way back? If that was the case, then the idea of starting to search from here was indeed not wrong, and the place where Mahito was might not be far from here. He definitely already knew that he had come. After all, that thing that was monitoring him was still there. To be honest, he would probably have forgotten that thing if he hadn't been silently warned that he was always being stared at, and he had gotten used to it. His body had instinctively diluted that faint sense of being peeped at. He had either already run away at this moment, or he was ambushing him somewhere. Although he felt that the former was more likely, this was just a feeling, and it couldn't be used as a standard for evaluating a person, and he would never know how he had died if he was too blindly confident. Swish! The waves in the water scattered, and Yuki slowly closed his eyes, and the sage art pattern appeared on his face, and he began to sense the abnormalities in the sewer. Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters, visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 172, JKNS, Chapter 172. 2087 words. Dozens of seconds passed. Swish! Yuki sensed the cursed spirits that lived in the sewer, and subconsciously took a step back, and swallowed, and didn't dare to move forward, and stood blankly in place, and took out the phone that he had put into his pocket, and made a call to Ichichi Kiyotaka. This number, damn it, is that guy Mahito planning to do a Hayaki daytime parade? Under the super strong senses of Sage Mode, he saw the cursed spirits who were squatting in this very complicated sewer. Because the route was winding, he hadn't sensed all of them, and he had just sensed a portion, and it was too far away. He had to have Ichichi start evacuating the crowd at this moment, or else it would be terrible if they started fighting, and he couldn't kill all of these cursed spirits that were transfigured humans. What if they ran out, hee. Even a monk would have to kneel and chant sutras for 7 days straight. What's wrong? Yuki-san? The phone was connected, and Ichichi Kiyotaka's voice was transmitted. Evacuate the crowd immediately, and have the local jujutsu sorcerers come to support. No, have all of the jujutsu sorcerers who can come overcome, and it's a little troublesome. Upholding the basic principles of jujutsu sorcerers, and protecting the people as the foundation, Yuki didn't want to go and stir up the hornet's nest at this moment. Understood, I'll start evacuating now. Ichichi Kiyotaka didn't ask any more questions, and hung up the phone, and picked up his credentials and said to the chief of the police department, Jujutsu High, and please cooperate with us and start evacuating the local people. Understood, we haven't gone in yet, okay, we'll start focusing on evacuating the crowd now, see you later, Yuki-senpai. Itadori Yuji looked at the phone that had been hung up, and turned his head to look at Fushiguro, who was meditating on the ground, and black cursed marks had appeared on his face, and it seemed that he had shielded the senses of the surroundings, and he was sitting quietly. Although he didn't know why Yuki-senpai had suddenly told them to start evacuating the crowd, what Itadori Yuji knew was that a war was about to begin here. Looking at the people who were walking on the street, he shouted, "Please stay away, and this place is about to." 1805. Although many people had left under the police's evacuation, there were also people who were unwilling to leave no matter what, and they had closed their doors tightly, and were blowing the wind with the air conditioner on, and didn't hear what was happening outside. "Please leave, everyone." The loudspeaker on the police car shouted loudly, and inside a house nearby, a girl opened the curtains and poked her head out and looked at the people who were leaving outside, and turned her head and shouted at her mother, who was cooking in the kitchen, "Mom, why aren't we leaving? Everyone has left. Don't worry about it, and what is it to suddenly tell people to leave without a notice? What is this? Go watch TV." The mother, who was making dinner in the kitchen, muttered, "There are so many valuables in the house, so how could we possibly take them away, and those police officers are also making a fuss, and how could something happen?" Thump! A huge figure broke through the window, and instantly smashed the house, which was more than 2 meters high. Clang! The pot that contained the soup rolled onto the ground at this moment, and the boiling water was slowly being stained red by a red liquid. Pain, pain, die, die. The huge cursed spirit began to roar, and its eyes were scarlet, and it clenched the woman under its palm, and slowly raised its right hand, and the red liquid flowed down along its arm, and then it threw it into its mouth. Click, click. It made a horrifying sound, and it was like it was chewing on crispy bones. "Mom, Mom?" The girl looked at the huge creature that had suddenly appeared, and her legs kept failing her, and she knelt on the ground, and then cried loudly. "Mom, ah, ah, ah. Ha ha ha. It's starting, and it's my Hyaki Yagyo, and feel the powerlessness at this moment, Yuki." Clang. One by one, the manhole covers were lifted, and the cursed spirits emerged from the sewer in an orderly manner, and their dull pupils stared at those who were being evacuated, and their figures began to skyrocket. It was like an inflating balloon, and their eyes were about to burst, and their mouths opened violently, and the muscles that were connected to the corners of their mouths were being torn apart little by little, and they roared painfully, "It hurts." The lifeless artificial cursed spirits began to burn their souls, as if they had been released from some kind of restriction, and launched a final attack on those humans who were being evacuated. What is that? Because they had originally been people, it caused ordinary people to be able to see them, and the evacuating police officers' brains instantly crashed after looking at the cursed spirits that weren't human and weren't ghosts. They didn't seem to understand what this thing was, and it exceeded their knowledge of these years, and they had a feeling of watching a 3D movie. A second later, they recognized that this was reality after hearing people's screams, and then took out their guns, and shot at the cursed spirits. Bang, 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 bang. 7 shots in a row, and the magazine was emptied, and the police officer was still pulling the trigger, but there were no bullets at this moment. 3 shots had hit the cursed spirit's forehead, but it wasn't that weak with the cost of burning its soul, and its soul seemed to have been scorched by fire, and the intense pain directly covered the stinging pain in its head, and it charged into the pile of humans. It waved its big hand, and the people who hadn't reacted were instantly killed, and turned into minced meat, and scattered on the ground. It roared, "It hurts. Damn it, 4 hours, and even the supporting jujutsu sorcerers can't make it in time, and the people have only been evacuated for a short time." Yuki, who was sensing the situation in the distance, frowned tightly, and looked at Mahito, who was laughing wildly in front of him. "It's really interesting, isn't it?" Mahito grabbed the necks of 2 humans with both hands, and said, "I just took a nap, and you started evacuating the humans? How boring." After saying that, the figures of the 2 people, whose necks had been grabbed by something, began to distort, and then instantly transformed into artificial cursed spirits. He continued, "Souls that have been violently twisted like this can't live for too long, but it's enough to play with you, and kill him. He let go of his hands, and the two people, who had been twisted into cursed spirits, began to attack, and the two people, who had been walking upright, were like animals at this moment, and had human heads and snake bodies, and their legs had turned into snake tails, and their hands were dragging on the ground, and were making themselves move forward quickly. What a troublesome guy. Looking at the task that the system had released 5 minutes ago, Yuki, who was holding the wave-breaking sword, slashed out with a fierce strike, and the huge sage art slash instantly dismembered the two, and it was like a dark red blood crescent, and it slashed towards Mahito. 10 minutes ago. 1754? Sorry, Yuki-san, and although we've tried our best to evacuate the people, the time is still too short, and there are still many people who are staying at home and are unwilling to leave. Ichichi Kiyotaka, who was holding a tablet, reported on the street, and Itadori Yuji, who was behind him, was evacuating the crowd, and shouted loudly, "Please hurry up, and it's going to get dark. Hurry up, and it's going to start on my side, and it's estimated that it will affect the ground before long." Yuki, who was in the sewer, frowned tightly after hearing that they hadn't finished evacuating over there, and he had discovered it too late, and the consequences of bringing the war to the ground were imaginable. Thump. The sound of stepping on water was transmitted, and a cursed spirit darted out from the darkness. Because the sun was about to set, the already dark sewer was even more pitch black at this moment, and it seemed to have been invaded by Octopus Inc., and you couldn't see your fingers. Die, die. A cursed spirit with 4 legs and a body that was like a snake instantly charged in front of Yuki, and opened its huge mouth horizontally, and its scarlet pupils flashed in this pitch-black sewer. It bit down on Yuki, who was making a phone call, and it seemed that it was going to break him in half at the waist. Swoosh. A mouth that was as big as a wash basin instantly closed, but it hadn't bitten anything, and the crisp sound of teeth colliding echoed in the sewer. Cursed spirit? Its scarlet pupils blinked twice, and it seemed a little silly, and it didn't know where the meat that had been at its mouth had gone. The water on the ground instantly rose up in the next second, and it was like an extremely sharp guillotine. Sage Art Water Release, Triple Water Formation Wall. Yuki turned off his phone, and put it into his pocket, and the artificial cursed spirit, who had been standing in place, was instantly cut into 4 pieces. The black water wall fell, and Yuki continued to move forward while stepping on the corpse of the artificial cursed spirit, and as he went deeper, the sewer, which could only allow one person to walk through, became wider at this moment, and he was getting further and further away from the ground. And he had been discovered. In his senses, piles of cursed spirits were swarming along the narrow sewer, and there was also a figure who was walking over unhurriedly, Mahito. Look who I found. A lone little mouse. Among the groups of artificial cursed spirits, Mahito walked over unhurriedly, and 5 cursed spirits who were like small titans were following behind him. It was about to start, the Hyaki Yagyo. It was like a rat plague, and the cursed spirits began to move, and the muffled running sound echoed in the underground. What's going on? Is it an earthquake? Yoshino Junpei, who was evacuating people on the road, frowned, and looked down at the manhole cover, and he always felt that there was something running under here, and then curiously lifted the manhole cover. Clang. The manhole cover in his hand slammed down. See you, cursed spirit. Yoshino Junpei's words were somewhat trembling at this moment, and he seemed to have seen a cursed spirit dart past just now, and there wasn't just one. This strange move also attracted the attention of the people nearby. Quick, quick, go, quickly. Yoshino Junpei looked at the people who were watching, and shouted loudly, and he didn't care what they would think of him, and he only knew that he had to quickly evacuate the crowd at this moment, and there weren't many jujutsu sorcerers who had arrived here, and they couldn't let so many people all survive, and he had to quickly evacuate the people. There were really too many manhole covers on a street, and it would be very terrifying if cursed spirits all darted out. Sage Art Water Release, Water Dragon Bullet Technique. Yuki quickly made hand seals in the sewer, and the muddy sewage on the ground formed a water dragon at this moment, and charged towards the cursed spirits who were besieging him. The huge water dragon instantly filled the entire sewer, and annihilated all of the attacking cursed spirits. Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters, visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 173, JKNS, Chapter 173. 2,140 words. But this was just a drop in the bucket, and the water dragon quickly dissipated because its sage art had been exhausted, and the cursed spirits were like a tide, and after the ones in front had died, a large group of cursed spirits rushed in from behind. Yuki walked forward slowly, and continued to make hand seals with both hands, and another water dragon appeared, and annihilated all of the attacking cursed spirits. Chirp chirp chirp. His right hand was covered in lightning, and the deafening sound of birds chirping echoed in the sewer, and the crisscrossing white currents illuminated this dark world, and his black pupils slowly transformed into 3 Tomo Sharingan. This speed of advancing was still too slow, and those cursed spirits had already climbed up along the manholes that led to the ground. Phew! Yuki picked up the wave-breaking sword behind him, and the black backpack was isolating the current on his right hand. He took the sword out of the backpack, and the sound of metal rubbing together rang out, and Yuki, who had already clenched the hilt of the sword, injected the lightning in his hand into it, and the pitted sword body shone with a white light, and then lightning crisscrossed. The chirping of Chidori became even more intense, and Yuki, who was holding a long sword, had also developed a new way to play with the wave-breaking sword at this moment, and he was injecting ninjutsu into the sword body, and was allowing the sword to also have the same properties. The Sage Art Lightning Wave-Breaking Sword was also born. Phew! A mouthful of turbid air was exhaled, and Yuki began to act, and with the cells that had been stimulated by the internal current in his body, and along with the Sage Mode at this moment, the young man's speed had reached its peak. A silvery white current flashed past, and the cursed spirits that he passed were instantly disintegrated, and his scarlet pupils flickered quickly, and he was preventing himself from missing some of the transfigured cursed spirits because his speed was too fast. A large number of images flashed through his mind, and how to swing the sword, and how to kill with one strike, because his speed was too fast at this moment, it had caused his brain to become clumsy. Blurry images flashed in his mind, and the sword in his hand rose and fell, and it was like a photo that had been frozen, and dozens of blurry photos per second were waiting for his brain to analyze them, and he could still accept it at the beginning, but he slowly began to get a headache. Slowly, the young man chose to give up thinking, and let his senses replace his extremely nearsighted eyes, and began to slaughter. The dark world was flashed by the distorted current, until Mahito's arrival. Clang! A sound that was like he had slashed at steel was transmitted, and the wave-breaking sword instantly pierced into the thick wall that had suddenly appeared, and then the sound of sizzle 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 of frying meat was transmitted. It hurts. Ah, it hurts. It's so hot. Under the flashing white light, the nearby area was illuminated, and there were 3 faces on the meat wall that were roaring in pain, and then like tentacles, 3 faces grew out of the meat wall, and bit at Yuki with crying faces. Tisk. Yuki pulled out the wave-breaking sword that had been inserted into the meat wall, and then left, and his scarlet eyes stared at the 3 heads that had bitten at nothing. Oh dear, really, it's not good to be so impatient. Oh, my lovely Yuki, do you want a hug? I'll cherish you. As the meat wall that was composed of artificial cursed spirits began to fester, Mahito's stitched face was reflected in his scarlet pupils. Phew. Rough breaths were exhaled from his mouth, and the 3 Tomo were slowly rotating, and he was looking at the system task that had popped up. Task, defeat Mahito. Task reward, 150 points, 100 cursed energy permanently increased. Task, kill Mahito. Task reward, 300 points, 200 cursed energy permanently increased. Don't show that kind of expression, and do you know what? Only our souls are the same in this world, because we can both touch that ethereal essence. Mahito was playing with the soul in his hand, and it was as sticky as lacquer, and hideous faces floated between his hands, and it was like a ghost in the night. It hurts. The 3 human heads on the festering meat wall wailed, and the muscle fibers on their faces dripped down like liquid, and they quickly lost their breath. Are you disgusting me? Yuki's scarlet pupils stared at Mahito, who had a smiling face, and the sound of Chidori's chirping was echoing in his ears. He didn't have much of a feeling for these dead people, and he only had the system task in his eyes at this moment. Jujutsu sorcerers were based on saving people, and he was also doing this, and as long as he killed the cursed spirits, no one would die again. The sword in his right hand was raised, and he put on an offensive stance again, and in his senses, the transfigured cursed spirits had already gone out along the sewer, and he had to kill him at this moment. 5 cursed spirits were standing 200 meters away, and they seemed to have been specially transfigured, and they were emitting a dangerous aura, and they were standing motionless in place. Were they preventing him from domain expansion? That was indeed a good method. After all, the barrier outside the domain was really too fragile. Mangakyo. He didn't want to use it on him, so he would use his fists to exorcise him. How heartless, and you're clearly meeting so many times, and you still want to save those humans who you've never even met before. Mahito looked at the sword in Yuki's hand that was crisscrossed with lightning, and immediately recalled the special grade cursed tool cursed sword that Geto had told him about. It was a sword that could transform cursed energy into a substantial slash. His hands then clapped together forcefully, and opened again, and a cursed spirit that was like a long snake then appeared, and its white teeth opened, because there was no restriction from the skin, the gums were exposed, and its tongue was exposed, and it bit at Yuki. Since that's the case, then let's go and fight with all our might. Body removal. Swoosh. Looking at the attacking cursed spirit, Yuki raised the sword in his hand and slashed down, and the silvery white lightning instantly cut it in two, and his scarlet pupils stared straight at Mahito, and he turned around again and slashed out the lightning that was contained within the sword body. You don't want to talk to me? How scary. Staring at the attacking lightning, Mahito's legs transformed, and his bare human feet transformed into horse legs, and then he jumped away. Pat. Although the human creature was very perfect, and could adapt to all kinds of harsh environments, the limbs of some animals were far superior to humans, such as the explosive force of horse legs. It had the explosive force of a horse's hind legs, but it was only as heavy as a person, and its speed was also quite terrifying. In just an instant, Mahito had avoided the swift slash, and then charged towards Yuki, and his hands were covered in dark purple cursed energy. The war had begun. Ha 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 ha. Had he dodged it? Yuki was somewhat surprised after looking at Mahito, who was attacking, and how did he know that this sword could slash out cursed energy? He hadn't used it since he had seized the sword, so could it be that the higher-ups at Jujutsu High had been invaded by that guy Geto? How speechless, trash higher-ups, and was the information of Jujutsu sorcerers and special-grade cursed tools something that could be revealed? But the counterattack in his hand didn't stop, and that strike just now had slashed out the Chidori that was attached to his right hand, and the sewer, which had been illuminated by lightning, had returned to darkness at this moment. The departing power of lightning had broken open the solid walls of the sewer. Swoosh. He had never forgotten the swordsmanship that Maki had taught him. The young man threw the special-grade cursed tool in his hand like a shuriken, and a Rasengan began to condense in his right hand. Under Maki's guidance, Yuki had realized that he shouldn't see the weapon in his hand as something that was so dead, and he should throw it when he should throw it, and then use other weapons to continue attacking. Cursed tools were just tools, and they only needed to complete their due mission. And its mission now was to create an opportunity for Yuki. Looking at the attacking long sword, Mahito paused, and then immediately avoided it, and his different colored pupils stared at this long sword that had flashed past, and he didn't understand why he had thrown this special-grade cursed tool. Clang! The long sword was nailed to the ground, and Yuki, who was hand-rubbing a Rasengan, had also disappeared from where he was, and the blue light arrived in an instant, and reached the top of Mahito's head, and then pressed down. Sage Art Great Ball Rasengan. I was looked down on, huh? Mahito's pupils were reflecting the blue sphere, and he recalled the memory of his flesh being ground away. It was different from the feeling of his soul being torn apart, and it was similar to the feeling of being cut into pieces, and even his cells were being ground away, and just as it was about to smash into him, his horse legs kicked fiercely. It was like flying at a super low altitude, and he left while sticking to the ground. Thump! The huge Rasengan fell, and cracks appeared on the solid stone wall, and began to spread. Crack! As the spreading cracks became larger and larger, this cylindrical sewer also began to collapse because the stress was uneven. This is... Mahito looked at the sewer that was collapsing, and also understood that his attack idea at the beginning wasn't himself, but he was preparing to bury him and solve the cursed spirits who had already gone up. I won't let you go up. Mahito's hand suddenly became huge, and his Adam's apple began to wriggle, and then bulged, and it seemed that something was about to come out. Woo vomit! Dozens of compressed human souls were spat out from his mouth, and his hands, which had caught them, clapped together fiercely, and they were like soft and sticky substances, and they drilled out from between his fingers, but they wouldn't splash out. They opened again, and those souls that had been compressed together were completely displayed at this moment, and dozens of long snakes bit at Yuki, who was in the sky. The cracks had already reached the ceiling, and rubble had already started to fall, and this place could collapse at any time. It looks like it's the complete form, and its strength is so strong. Yuki looked at the attacking artificial cursed spirits, and he didn't think that he could kill him, because he had known that he could split his soul when he had first met him, and it had reached the point of being unkillable, and he could only exorcise this body of his. It was easier to handle now that it was the complete form, and he would kill him. Dark red cursed energy covered his whole body, and he used the expanding Great Ball Rasengan as a stepping stone, and charged into the dozens of long snakes that were opening their mouths, and plunged in headfirst. Inside the pitch-black space, the crowded walls of flesh wanted to crush this foreign object alive. The young man moved forward, and quickly made hand seals with both hands, and as the sound of Chidori rang out again, Yuki cut open a crack on the ground, and picked up the wave-breaking sword that had been stabbed into the ground, and completely cut open the cursed spirit's huge body, and red blood splattered like raindrops. Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters, visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 174, JKNS, Chapter 174. 2,131 words. The freed young man charged towards Mahito, and the power of lightning was re-injected into the sword body, and the silvery white current flashed past, and the 3 tomo in his eyes rotated quickly, and he was preparing to finish him off with this strike. Do you want a hug? Mahito spread his arms, and his eyes transformed into the compound eyes of an insect, and he was analyzing Yuki's movements at this moment, and although his speed was indeed very fast, so what? Under the analysis of the compound eyes, everything was so slow. Nature was really amazing, and insects had evolved compound eyes for survival, and they were composed of many hexagonal small eyes, and the more small eye faces there were, the more developed the visual perception would be. Dragonflies had 28,000 small eyes, and he had 100,000. Yuki's every move seemed to be unobstructed, and Mahito, who had seen through his attack trajectory, was preparing to give him a loving hug. He would become his possession after he hugged him. Just as Mahito was preparing to step forward and hug him, those scarlet pupils seemed to burst out with amazing cursed energy, and his vision began to blur. Strange? What's going on? Mahito was somewhat surprised, but he also knew that Yuki's eyes were playing tricks, but he just knew it, and he didn't seem to be able to do anything at this moment. Was he going to die? He would die. He didn't know how many seconds had passed outside, and he only knew that his consciousness seemed to have been drawn in, and his heart began to become anxious, and he didn't expect that Yuki would actually have this kind of trump card. It wasn't like before, where his soul was attracted into another space, but his consciousness seemed to have been blinded by something, and had become disconnected from his body. His eyes closed, and he realized that he seemed to have come to a familiar place when he opened his eyes again. There was an azure sky, the sound of waves, and Geto Suguru, who was playing chess in front of him. It's your turn. Just as Geto Suguru finished speaking, the world in front of him instantly became dark, and the azure sky was quickly invaded by darkness, and it was like ink, and it vanished into thin air. After taking a closer look, it turned out to be a wall, and he seemed to be flying in the sky at this moment, and he only had his head. He didn't know if it was because of the compound eyes, but it had given him more space to think at this moment, because the world in front of him had become much slower. There's really no other way, let's begin. Mahito's mouth opened, but no sound was made, and 2 hands appeared from his mouth, and then made hand seals. Domain expansion, self-embodiment of perfection. It was like a flower that was blooming, and countless hands began to bloom, and the black domain instantly enveloped Yuki, who was preparing to finish off Mahito, and the sword that was crisscrossed with lightning was still flying in the sky at this moment, and dark red cursed energy covered Yuki's hands, and he was just preparing to completely destroy his body. He then sensed the abnormality at this moment, and his scarlet 3-tomo Sharingan contracted fiercely, and he looked incredulously at Mahito's head, which was flying, and the hands that were blooming like a flower behind him, and he could actually open a domain. Dozens of hands attacked the young man as if they had bloomed out of thin air. Not good. Yuki quickly withdrew his hands, and his hands were intertwined together, and he had to open a domain and fight head-on. Domain expansion, mirror shape, 2 sides. Another black domain then opened, and the sage art in Yuki's body dropped sharply, and almost emptied him. Drip. The sound of a water droplet was transmitted, and the tug-of-war between the 2 domains had begun. Become my possession. Mahito shouted inside the domain. Because both domains existed, they had lost the 100% hit effect that was unique to domains, and it had turned into a tug-of-war of power between the domains. On the surface of the water, which was like a mirror, what was being reflected was no longer the starry sky, but it was hands, and they were connected together and woven into a net, and dozens of hands fell from the sky, and slapped at Yuki. TCH. Yuki caught the wave-breaking sword that was flying in the sky, and then prepared to flash away, and because the sage art in his body had been exhausted, he could no longer release ninjutsu to fight, and he could only hide outside the domain for a bit, and release the seal. Crack! This wasn't the sound of a mirror breaking, but it was the sound of a domain breaking, and the sewer, which had already been tottering, began to collapse at this moment. Yuki looked at the boulders that had broken through the domain and were falling, and his pupils contracted fiercely. This guy was scheming against him. Crack! The cracks on the domain began to spread, and Yuki didn't have any extra sage art in his body at this moment, and the seal hadn't been released yet, and he would definitely die if he was hit by these things. And Mahito had taken a fancy to the weakness that the cursed energy in his body would definitely be emptied after he used domain expansion, and was using the collapse that he had created to bury himself. He had been played, huh? Do you want a hug? My embrace is very warm. Oh. Mahito, who had reattached his head, looked at Yuki with a playful expression, and he wouldn't die even if these things smashed him to smithereens, but what would Yuki, who didn't have any cursed energy at this moment, do? I'll see you above. The three Tomo in Yuki's eyes began to converge, and the wave-breaking sword, which had been glowing with lightning in his hand, had become dim at this moment, and the young man withdrew the sage art that had been stored inside. A skeletal Susanoo began to float up. Crack! The already dilapidated domain completely shattered, and the collapsing boulders instantly submerged the two. Thump! Een seal release. Yuki, who had been buried by the rubble, quickly made hand seals with both hands, and because he had the protection of Susanoo, he wasn't in any major trouble at this moment, but his eyes were getting more and more painful, and he couldn't take it anymore. The cursed energy that had been stored in his forehead flowed back into his body, and the dim sage art pattern on his face completely dissipated, and the Mangekyo Sharingan in his eyes began to decompose, and transformed back into three Tomo, and as the Susanoo dissipated, the boulders that didn't have any support began to fall. Phew! He looked at the falling boulders with a somewhat tired gaze, and Yuki clenched the wave-breaking sword in his right hand, and he was also somewhat tired, and even if the vacant cursed energy in his body was filled. But he had been slashing all the way here after all, and his spirit would inevitably be tired. But the situation at this moment didn't allow him to leave, and the system task hadn't been completed. The veins on his right hand, which was clenching the wave-breaking sword, bulged, and majestic cursed energy was injected into the sword body, and the silvery bright sword body became flushed. He slashed out with a sword. The boulder was instantly cut in two, and a red crescent moon broke through the buried soil, and flew towards the sky. Yuki also followed closely behind, and was constantly finding a foothold in the soil that had been broken open, and climbing upwards, until he broke out of the ground. The scarlet crescent moon moved forward all the way, and it seemed to be unstoppable. It had to be said that this road had been built well, and there were faults underground, but this cement road hadn't collapsed along with it. It didn't realize that it had been hollowed out until it had been broken open by this huge slash, and it began to collapse. It hurts, kill. Help! Just as he broke out of the ground, Yuki heard the roars of cursed spirits, and the cries for help from humans. He looked over after hearing the sound, and a moving mosaic suddenly attacked, and opened its huge mouth and bit at him. Fishing law enforcement? Yuki only saw its appearance after the cursed spirit had arrived in front of him, and it was a cursed spirit that was similar to a fish, but it had limbs, and there was also a woman who could shout on its tail. The needle-like teeth bit at Yuki, and its black pupils stared intently at the man who had suddenly popped out in front of it, and clothing fabric could be seen in the gaps between its teeth, and it was all kinds of colors, and it looked like it had eaten many people. The woman on the tail continued to shout, "Help!" In the next second, a white light flashed past, and the cursed spirit was instantly dismembered, and scarlet blood splattered all over Yuki's body. The young man didn't care, but closed his eyes and re-entered sage mode, and the blood stains that had stained the sword in his hand began to turn black, and then transformed into flying ash and dissipated. Without the super-strong senses of sage mode, his extremely nearsighted eyes were no different from those of a blind man. 2 breaths later, Yuki slowly opened his eyes, and looked at the blood on his body that had begun to dissipate, and couldn't help but frown, and this wasn't an artificial cursed spirit. Why was it so big if it wasn't an artificial cursed spirit? He probably wouldn't have felt strange if it had been in a forest, or some remote place, but this was a prosperous city, and this kind of cursed spirit should have already been exorcised. Could it be that guy Geto was also here? I'm here. Yuki. Mahito's playful voice appeared from the pit, and interrupted Yuki's thoughts. A figure jumped out, and 5 artificial cursed spirits who were similar to small titans followed closely behind, and the aura on their bodies seemed even more dangerous. Let's start the second round of the slaughter, and kill him. Mahito, who had landed, sat down on the cement ground with a plop, and looked at the 5 artificial cursed spirits who had already started to burn their souls. He needed to recover slightly, and domain expansion consumed too much cursed energy, but why did he feel that Yuki was still so lively and vigorous, and the cursed energy in his body didn't seem to have decreased at all? Oh, the artificial cursed spirits, who had received the order, roared, and the aura in their bodies continued to climb, and at the cost of burning the lifespan of multiple lives, they obtained explosive power in an instant. They weren't inferior to grade 1 sorcerers at this moment, and it would be within 1 minute. Thump! The powerful force caused the ground to crack, and the 5 cursed spirits arrived in an instant over a distance of dozens of meters, and thighs that were as thick as his thighs swung towards Yuki like raindrops. TCH. Yuki clicked his tongue, and quickly waved his sword to block, and the other party had a feeling of a novice beating a master to death with random punches. Clang! A crisp collision sound was transmitted, and it was like the sound of metal bumping against each other, and the powerful force directly sent Yuki flying. Damn it! Don't their hands hurt? After cursing inwardly, the young man took out the sage art exploding clay bird from his backpack, and threw it out fiercely, and his empty left hand made a fist, and his index finger and middle finger stood up, and shouted loudly. Ha! Bang! 5 golden eagles flapped their wings, and blew away the white fog, and attacked the attacking artificial cursed spirits. Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 175, JKNS, Chapter 175. 2,129 words. Thump. After the violent explosion, Yuki also landed safely, but in his senses, those artificial cursed spirits were fine, and they had just paused for a moment, and then charged over again. TCH, it's getting more and more troublesome, and I'll wipe you out in one go. Yuki threw the long sword in his hand up, and quickly made hand seals with both hands, and the sage art in his body dropped sharply by 2,000, and then took a deep breath. Sage art fire release, great fire annihilation. Phew. Raging flames were spat out from his mouth, and this street was already empty, and the setting sun had caused the shadows of these tall buildings to be infinitely stretched, but another sun was born at this moment. The scalding flames touched the ground, and then splashed open, and the street, which was dozens of meters wide, was instantly filled with flames, and the trees on the side of the road were sizzling from being baked by the high temperature, and transformed into flying ash after a moment. It was like a sea of fire, and the waves, which were dozens of meters high, instantly submerged the 5 attacking cursed spirits, and the remaining power didn't diminish and swept towards Mahito, who was resting. How scary. Feeling the temperature that was causing the air to distort, Mahito quickly got up and left, and he had to dart to a place where there were many people, or else it would be difficult to restrict that guy Yuki. Boom! The place where the fire wave covered was all burned to starch, and the glass began to crack because it had been suddenly heated locally. Crack, thump. The glass shattered, and the people who were hiding in their homes looked at the scalding flames outside the window, and their bodies began to tremble from being scared. What was this? Was it the end of the world? Not to mention the man-eating monsters that had suddenly appeared on the street. What was going on with these flames? Could it be that this world had already collapsed? Phew. The flames dissipated, and Yuki looked at the empty street, and spat out a mouthful of fire. In his senses, Mahito was escaping at this moment, and was heading towards a place where there were many people, and he said with a damned expression, "That damned guy." The road ahead had already become a prohibited area, and the scalding flames had burned the air clean, and it was a vacuum area at this moment, although the air was refilling. His left hand took out a golden eagle from his backpack, and then threw it out, and as he said "ha," the golden eagle's physique became larger. Yuki picked up the wave-breaking sword that had been stabbed into the ground, and dragged the golden eagle's leg and chased after him. He had to kill him today. Ha ha ha. It was indeed right to not run away today, and it's really too interesting. Mahito was running wildly on the street, and his originally human legs had transformed into rabbit legs at this moment, and he was leaping dozens of meters, and his different colored pupils were looking around. Don't even think about going past. Cursed spirit. A jujutsu sorcerer who was escorting people away saw the humanoid cursed spirit who was running towards the side, and charged over with a cursed tool in his hand. Oh. I've got one. Mahito was overjoyed after seeing the human, and looked at the jujutsu sorcerer who was attacking with a cursed tool, and charged to his face in an instant with an acceleration, and said while grabbing his neck with his right hand, "What a good experimental material, idle transfiguration." Woo! The man who was being grabbed rolled his eyes back, and his figure began to distort, and his face was hideous, and his hands were gripping the hand on his neck tightly. And then, the man transformed into a huge cursed spirit under the gaze of a group of confused humans. Ah! Screams were transmitted, and the people who were at a loss began to run around. The jujutsu sorcerer who had been protecting them had suddenly become the same thing as the so-called cursed spirits. The people's worldviews began to collapse. No, they had already collapsed long ago, and all that they could think about at this moment was how to escape. Kill them. Mahito gently patted the cursed spirit that had been created by the jujutsu sorcerer in front of him, and comforted him in a low voice. Awwa! The huge cursed spirit began to act, and slaughtered those that he should have been protecting, and screams rang out immediately, and tears welled up in the cursed spirit's eyes. He really wanted to die. And end this appearance that wasn't human and wasn't a ghost. Don't run, and let me caress you properly. Mahito instantly grabbed 2 people who were running away, and grabbed the back of their necks with both hands, and was just preparing to use idle transfiguration, when he sensed that the artificial cursed spirit that he had just transformed had died. It wasn't a natural death from the soul burning out, but it had been killed in an instant. Yuki. That guy was chasing very fast. Phew, you're really good at running, Mahito. Yuki, who was holding the wave-breaking sword, walked over slowly, and red blood was dripping from the sword body, and a white bird could be seen circling in the sky. He had taken a shortcut by crossing the tall buildings. How convenient. Of course. Mahito wasn't particularly afraid, and clenched the two humans in his hand, and laughed loudly and said, "Haha, how is it? My Hyaki Yagyo, and feel the powerlessness at this moment, Yuki. Save me, are you a jujutsu sorcerer? Quickly save me. Save me. Save me, I have a lot of money, and I can share it with you. No, I'll give it all to you." The two people, who didn't know what was grabbing them, shouted loudly, and tears flowed from the corners of their eyes. Damn it. He was a little annoyed, and what was this about saving people? Looking at the panicked two people in front of him, Yuki clenched the wave-breaking sword in his hand again. The war at this moment was developing in an uncontrollable direction, and the jujutsu sorcerers from other places couldn't make it in time at all in 4 hours, and the people who had come were also pitifully weak. It's really interesting, isn't it? Mahito clenched his hands, and turned his head to look at those who were escaping, and said, "I just took a nap, and you started evacuating the humans, how boring." He couldn't escape at this moment, and there were still things that he hadn't tested, and although he might die here, he didn't care anymore, and he would anger him, and make the situation at this moment become even more intense. He had to peek at the essence of that soul. His hands clenched the humans in his hands tightly, and then he used idle transfiguration, and forcibly twisted the souls of the humans in his hands, and said, "Humans who have been violently twisted like this can't live for too long, but it's enough to play with you, and kill him." After saying that, he let go of his hands, and looked at Yuki's soul, which had somewhat started to tremble, and he had started to become annoyed. "Let's start over here. What a troublesome guy." Looking at the tears in the eyes of the two artificial cursed spirits who were attacking, he injected the sage art in his body into the sword, and he seemed to have started to become annoyed. In his senses, the humans who were cowering in their homes were being slaughtered by the cursed spirits who had darted out, and there were also jujutsu sorcerers who were resisting, but they were like a mantis trying to stop a chariot, and they were being crushed by numbers, and Itadori and Fushiguro hadn't sensed it yet, and they were probably in other places. His right hand clenched the wave-breaking sword, and slashed out fiercely with a strike, and the sage art slash instantly dismembered the two who were attacking, and the scarlet crescent moon slashed towards Mahito with undiminished momentum. This kind of attack was ineffective against him, and Yuki knew this well, and then threw the long sword in his hand, and his clenched hands were covered in scarlet cursed energy. "Let's start slaughtering." Mahito leaped dozens of meters, and plunged into the pile of humans who were escaping. After all, they couldn't see himself, and Yuki had to personally go and kill people if he wanted to kill himself. During the jump, his hands became huge, and his Adam's apple began to wriggle, and the human souls that had been stored in his stomach were spat out, and his hands, which had caught them, clapped together fiercely. Pat. Multiple souls, several souls of different sexes. The souls in his hands began to fuse, and then transformed into a small titan, and this one wasn't to delay Yuki, but it was to prevent him from domain expansion again. Although he felt that it was very ridiculous, and how could anyone use 2 domain expansions in one day, but that was the feeling that he was giving him, and he could still use it at this moment. Monster. But it was because he was a monster, so he had achieved himself, and he could only grow by fighting him, who was also a monster. Mahito plunged into the crowd of people who were escaping, and the small titan plunged into the houses. He. Let's continue slaughtering, Yuki. Mahito laughed loudly, and his different colored pupils stared at Yuki, and his right hand began to distort, and it was like clay that was being shaped, and transformed into a long sword. He could kill all of these people at any time at this moment, and it was just a matter of seeing what Yuki would do, and whether he would chase after him, or go and exorcise that annoying artificial cursed spirit first. "Don't you dare threaten me with humans." Yuki had completely exploded at this moment, and this guy was specifically picking at his bottom line to play, and he would kill him. He waved his right hand, and the golden eagle that was circling in the sky charged towards the pile of people where Mahito was. Because of the existence of people, he couldn't use his full strength after all, and it would cause a large-scale death of humans, and although he didn't have much of a feeling for their deaths, he didn't want his hands to be stained with the blood of those innocent people. Because, they had the right to live, and he didn't have the right to kill them, and they were innocent. He didn't want to suppress himself at this moment, and he would erase the last bit of goodness in his heart. Ha ha ha. You really did it, and you, who is a jujutsu sorcerer, are actually taking the initiative to kill innocent passers-by. Mahito looked at the bird that was attacking, and didn't resist, but just laughed wildly with distorted eyes. This war is ultimately me who has won. Because I don't have morals, ha ha ha. Yuki was cold, and Mahito knew this, and he would ruthlessly exorcise the humans who had transformed into artificial cursed spirits, and he would also let the cursed spirits kill humans, and then exorcise the cursed spirits on this basis. But he had never killed innocent people. And his heart, and the scales in his heart, had begun to tilt at this moment, and it had changed from not killing innocent passersby, to actively killing innocent passersby, and this was a curse, and it was a curse that would accompany him for life. Rest in peace and be buried with me, and I'll kill him. Yuki's eyes shrank to the extreme, as if he was comforting himself, and he would kill this guy here. No, don't. The people who were escaping saw the bird that was falling extremely fast in the sky, and shouted loudly, and a look of despair appeared on their faces. Underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Chapter 176, JKNS, Chapter 176. 1850 words. TCH. Yuki immediately raised his hand, and had the golden eagle return to the sky, and he still couldn't bring himself to do it. Not killing innocent passersby was his bottom line, just like he deeply loved his companions, and then he shouted loudly in his mind to Shura. Shura, have the slug sage go back, and bring me the omnipotent summoning scroll from under the bed, the war has begun. Okay, master. Shura was in the cafeteria at this moment, and looked at the slug sage, who was chatting with Sumi, and said, Big sister, please go back, and something has happened on master's side. What's wrong with Yuki? Maki and the others on the side looked at Shura. But he didn't say a word, but directly left, and went back to the house to get the summoning scroll. Then I'll be leaving first, and Yuki has probably encountered some trouble, and Sumi, you'll go live in Sister Maki's house tonight. The slug sage said, and without waiting for Ueno Sumi to reply, she directly left. Bang! As a cloud of white smoke appeared, and then dissipated again, the slug sage had disappeared without a trace, and she had already returned to the inside of the scroll. Phew! Yuki calmed his restless heart, and he indeed needed to calm down at this moment, and that guy Mahito was playing with him, and he had always been challenging his bottom line. He knew that he couldn't use his full strength in the city, so he had become unscrupulous. Master, I'm ready. Shura's voice echoed in his mind, and Yuki slowly closed his eyes, and took a deep breath, and his heart became calm, and then bit his thumb, and quickly made hand seals with both hands, and said, Now is the second round of slaughter that only belongs to us, Mahito. Summoning technique. His right hand pressed on the ground, and an incomprehensible seal unfolded on the ground, and as a bang sounded, white smoke appeared, and Shura, who was holding the omnipotent summoning scroll in his mouth, appeared on the street. Awah! As an intimidating wolf howl was issued, Yuki knew that this guy must have been watching too much Animal World. Mahito looked at Yuki, who had regained his calm, and also knew that these humans couldn't make him angry, and then his hands transformed into long ropes, and tied up all of those who were running away, and then another pair of hands grew out from under his armpits, and his Adam's apple wriggled, and dozens of souls were spat out from his mouth. Pat. His hands, which had caught them, clapped together fiercely, and his different-colored pupils stared at Yuki, and said, What, has your kindness flared up? But, I won't kill these humans and I'll let them die under your techniques. Whatever, I don't care anymore. Yuki took the omnipotent summoning scroll from Shura's mouth, and tore it open fiercely, and sprinkled the blood that was still dripping from his right index finger onto the word summoning, and quickly made hand seals with both hands. He was going to start summoning randomly, and each random summoning would consume 1 point and 100 cursed energy. It was time to gamble his life at this moment. Summoning technique. The system prompt popped up. Points -1, cursed energy, Sage Art -100, summoning complete. Bang! Who is summoning this great me? As a roar was transmitted, the white smoke dissipated in an instant, and a huge body was displayed outside, and Manda saw the humans in front of him at a glance, and said while flicking his tongue, they look delicious. Your luck isn't bad. Yuki looked at Manda, who had been summoned, and kicked his purple scales, and said, Swallow all of those guys who aren't humans for me. Ha! Brat, who are you ordering around? Manda flicked his tongue, and he had already escaped from that world that he couldn't get out of, so why did he still have to listen to the words of this human? Who was he? He was Manda. He was Manda, who feared neither heaven nor earth. Just as he was preparing to attack him, a red light suddenly appeared on his forehead, and a piercing pain went straight to his heart. Yo, you brat! Phew, as expected, other than the slug sage, the other summoned beasts are all untrustworthy, and it looks like I have to kill you along the way. Yuki looked at Manda, who was preparing to kill his master as soon as he had come out, and his heart, which had finally calmed down, had become restless again at this moment. Ha ha ha. Mahito looked at Yuki, who had created a contradiction for himself and his soul, which had started to riot again, and laughed loudly, and shouted, "Does this Shikigami want to kill his master? It's the first time that I've seen this, and I'm sorry, but it's really too funny. I'll kill you." The three Tomo in Yuki's eyes rotated quickly, and he stared intently at the livestock in front of him, and he would kill this guy. Brat. Manda's face was somewhat hideous, and because of the contract, he couldn't attack Yuki, but he could not listen to his orders, and since that was the case, then he would run away, and anyway, the world was so big, and he wouldn't stay under someone for a long time. "I'm leaving." Manda didn't say anything else, and directly left. Livestock that doesn't have any intelligence. Yuki cursed in his mouth, and his mood was terrible at this moment, and the three Tomo in his eyes began to converge, and an amazing dojutsu then erupted. As expected, animals like snakes couldn't be trusted, and since that was the case, then he would kill him and summon again, and there would always be one who was obedient. He was going to turn Manda into a vegetable. A good opportunity, and it should be fun to transform such a big livestock into my possession. In an instant, Mahito and Yuki, who had been enemies, reached a consensus at the same time, and one wanted to transform his soul, and the other wanted to turn him into a vegetable. "Why, you guys?" Before Manda, who hadn't had time to escape, could react, he was instantly pulled into a genjutsu by Yuki, and at the same time, his soul was being ravaged by Mahito, and even if his layer of scales was strong, it had become a showpiece at this moment, and their attacks were directly hitting his soul. Ah. In his wails, Manda prepared to return to the scroll, but whether he could return was all up to whether Yuki agreed or not, and although he couldn't force the summoned beast to return, he could prevent the summoned beast from returning. Seeing that his retreat had been cut off, Manda begged for mercy. I'm sorry, let me go, and I'll be obedient, and I'll even let you take my reverse scale." "You're begging for mercy now? It's too late. I hate the guys who backstab me the most." Yuki began to tamper with Manda's memories, and the red light of the Mangekyo in his eyes lit up. He had originally just wanted him to clean up the trash. After all, Shura might not be able to stop them, and he would pull Mahito into his domain, but he had been strongly suppressed by anger at this moment. These damned guys. None of them could leave. What amazing guys. Mahito touched Manda's purple scales with his right hand, and operated idol transfiguration and began to transform his soul. "The master is taming this damned guy, and get out of here for me." Shura charged to Mahito's side with a sage art cannon in his mouth, and the golden light then shot out, and forced Mahito back. TCH. Looking at his burned right hand, Mahito clicked his tongue. He had failed to transform his soul. He couldn't fight anymore. With this big guy here, no one could destroy it from the outside once Yuki opened his domain, and he didn't really want to have that guy Geto come out and save him. But he would still send him a big gift before leaving. A large number of memories that didn't even exist were forcibly poured into Manda's mind, and Yuki didn't care about what was there and what wasn't, and he had stuffed them all in forcefully, and he was going to cripple this guy. Manda's vertical pupils gradually transformed into Scarlet 3 Tomo Sharingan at this moment, and he had lost his former splendor, and he had turned into a slave who couldn't think, and could only obey orders at this moment. "Go and eat those guys who aren't humans." Yuki's eyes returned to 3 Tomo, and he ordered, "And then come back and commit suicide." "Yes." Manda lowered his head, and flicked his tongue, and his huge body wriggled, and then left. Combat power? Yuki didn't need combat power, and he would have Manda return to the omnipotent summoning scroll and commit suicide in a while, and let those bastards know the consequences of disobeying orders. Sensing that Mahito hadn't left yet, Yuki estimated the distance, and intertwined his hands together, and prepared to pull him into his domain and solve him. "Yuki, you've won, and I'll send you a big gift." Mahito, who had already prepared, threw out all of the souls that he had stored at this moment, and split himself apart, and then escaped. He wasn't an idiot, and he would beat them while they were down when there was a favorable situation, and he would prepare a retreat when there was an unfavorable situation, and this was common sense, and today was just playing around, and it wasn't the final battle yet. "Shoot him down with all your might, Shura." Yuki wouldn't let this guy run, or else he wouldn't be able to sleep at night. "Yes, master." Shura opened his big mouth, and his sharp fangs were displayed, and golden light suddenly appeared in his mouth, and the sage art in his body began to converge. The cursed spirits who had been thrown out by Mahito had all taken shape, and a dozen artificial cursed spirits who were dozens of meters high blocked the entire street, and their huge bodies suddenly became bloated, and their eyeballs bulged outwards, and it seemed that they couldn't accept their bloated physiques at this moment, and they sat on the ground with a plop. Thump! It was like a flesh bomb, and they exploded one after another, and the originally white cement road was stained red at this moment. Crash! underscore 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 underscore. For more advanced chapters visit my Patreon. Patreon.com/Kane45. Tier, $10 casual reader, plus 20 advanced chapter. $20 intermediate reader, plus 40 advanced chapter. $40 expert reader, plus 80 advanced chapter. Update, Monday to Friday, update 3 chapters a day. Saturday and Sunday, off. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.